Hey, my friends, I am excited to read another part of Jed and the Junkyard War. When we last left, they had sailed, they were following the treasure map, which is the relic watch that Jed is wearing. It took them into a junk storm, which I thought was a bad thing, but it turned out that's kind of a treasure because it brings up new junk. So they have all kinds of canned food now. They have all kinds of metal that they've gotten, and they are going into the township to celebrate. So I still haven't figured out what all this means, but I can't wait to find out. So we're going to read some more. So chapter 20. So when we last left, Captain Boggs said, "Dawn Drake, let's celebrate." So here they go. Bessie sailed at 1/10 of quarter speed as the crew patched up what was left of her. "Run the engines just enough to keep us from falling," Captain Boggs told Riggs. By nightfall, the ship still had so many holes that Jed had to hop along the main deck more than he walked. As he hammered a tin cookie sheet over a cavity in the smokestack, he smiled to himself. It wasn't too hard to fix a thing made from junk to begin with. The next morning, they worked most of the day scooping junk and patching holes. The red light had returned on Spyglass's face, and Jed considered using a nail to permanently fasten it down. When the sun began to fall, the sprocket called from the stack nest, "Dawn Drake Township, ahoy!" A huge mass floated against the sunset. "That's Dawn Drake?" Jed asked no one in particular. It looked more like a copper iceberg plucked from the ocean and hung in the sky. "Mm-hmm," Pavel nodded. "Best pubs in 3 townships." Hundreds of propellers, each as wide as Bessie, spun at the base of the township with blurring speed. "But it's in the air," Jed said. Pavel nodded. "Where else would it be?" "On the ground? Does every town fly?" "I suppose some are on the ground. Scrap place to put one, if you ask me. Don't last too long, what with the junk storms. One storm will bury you before you can blink." Skyships buzzed around the town, schooners like the Tinkers, oil rigs, 2-man shuttles that looked like rowboats with a rear propeller, and even a bulky steamboat. They docked beside a long strip of decking that protruded from the town like a ship's plank. Sprocket engaged the skyprop and set the ship idly hovering. Riggs roped the stern to the dock. "Isn't there a place to land?" Jed asked. "Dawn Drake would need twice the undertown propellers if every ship sat on top of it," Pavel said. The captain cleared his throat. "All right, let's see who's staying with Bessie." Something rattled between his cupped palms as he shook them. "Riggs, you first." He parted his thumbs an inch. Riggs plucked out a battery slathered in black paint. The captain moved to Pavel, who picked a black painted battery. Shay clapped her hands at the game and reached to take one. Captain Boggs grinned. "You think I'm leaving you with the tug after you snatched my favorite blanket? Not a chance. I'd come back missing my pillow." He looked at Shay with warm eyes, protective even. "One day on the tug, and she's already charmed the very heart of a man who wanted to toss me to my death for a bit of evening entertainment." Sprocket reached in and pulled out a black battery. "Down to you and me, Kai," the captain said, shaking the last 2 batteries together. Kaiser concentrated as if willing the right battery to come to his fingers. He pinched one and plucked it free. Red. "Ah, bad luck, Kai," Captain Boggs said, closing his fist around the last battery. Kaiser scowled and flicked the battery to the floor. "3rd time in a row." Captain Boggs patted Kaiser's shoulder apologetically. "Next time." He turned to the others. "Everyone take 1 handful of batteries. Let's celebrate." Everyone dug into the bathtub, carefully lifting a heap of batteries as if trying to redefine the volume of 1 handful. As they left the ship, Captain Boggs fidgeted with something in his pocket. He smiled at Jed and revealed the tip of a second red battery. "Shh," he whispered. Jed grinned. There'd been 2 red batteries the whole time. It was brilliant. If Boggs always picked last, he'd never be stuck on watch. They walked in a line along the thin strip of dock to the main town. The junk below was an indiscernible brown blur. "Watch yourselves here," Captain Boggs said to Jed. "Dawn Drake's a copper township." "What does that mean?" Jed asked. It means everyone who lives here is crazy, and not just regular crazy, full-on gutter clunk crazy. Light buildings on fire and run through them naked crazy. All of them. Sprocket folded her arms and glared. Hey, I was born here. What does that say about me? You're right, Captain Bogg said. Sprocket's not that crazy. She's worse, much worse. That's right, I am, Sprocket said with a satisfied nod, and don't forget it. Crazy how? Jed asked. Captain Bogg thought for a moment. Let me put it this way. I've never seen a group of people who want so badly to die. That's not true, Sprocket said. I don't want to die. Oh, so then you haven't competed in the new gauntlet in Geisterfield? They put up a second gauntlet? Captain Bogg shook his head. You wouldn't be interested. Sprocket gave him an offended scowl. Why not? Because it's insane, that's why. They call it the Juggernaut. The course runs more high-speed death vans, acid cloud bombs, and suicide spikes than even an iron battlecruiser could hold. Only 4 javelins out of 100 even survive the run. Excitement fluttered in Sprocket's eyes. I've got 2 weeks shore leave saved up. I bet if I leave after... Captain Bogg held up his hand. You're telling me you want to use your time off to run through some death gauntlet that I made up just now to prove a point? Wait, Sprocket opened her mouth. There's no... She glared at him and her shoulders slouched. Way to build up a girl's dreams, then crush them in your ugly sandpaper hands. Captain Bogg turned to Jed. See what I mean? Just wait until we're inside the township. They walked along the dock until it connected to a network of streets that squiggled in the giant cluster of buildings. The buildings nearest the town's edge were only a few stories high, but the deeper the group went toward the center, the higher the buildings reached into the air. Narrow structures couldn't have been more than 1 room wide, yet each was easily 20 stories tall. Jed imagined tipping them over with one of his bare hands. That was when Jed began to understand what Captain Bogg had meant. Thousands of cables, ladders, catwalks, and zip lines connected buildings together in a rickety network of scaffolding. Copper townspeople leaped from tip to tip with nothing but air below them. They sped recklessly down zip lines, lazily holding on with just a single hand. The catwalks had no railings. The ladders wobbled unsteadily, and the web of zip lines tangled together. One giant collision waiting to happen. They're so skinny, Jed said to Pavel. What are? The buildings. Buildings? You mean the spikes? Is that a spike? Jed asked, pointing to one of the pencil-like towers. Of course it is. Don't you got spikes in Denver? We call them buildings, or houses. We've got lots of them, but they're not very tall at all, sort of short and fat. Pavel thought for a moment. Then you stack them on top of each other? Jed laughed. No, just next to each other. But if there's lots, how do you fit them all in Denver? Denver's on the ground. We can build houses wherever we want. Pavel shook his head. Not here. Towns would need more propellers if they had Denver spikes. Is that why they're so tall and skinny? So they don't weigh as much? Pavel shrugged. I ain't the magistrate. I couldn't tell you. The coppers looked like a colony of bees swarming wildly through the town. Some rode coils of copper rail that spiraled around in spikes. Others hopped on pulley platforms that yanked them up into the sky. Jed read the copper lettering on the black double doors of a spike. Billy Bristol's Maps, accurate and updated weekly. The next shop advertised all things shatter, custom spindles, high-capacity battery drums, and quality finishes. The shop after that was a maintenance bay boasting 2-hour engine tune-ups for any standard S4 or T1 block. They passed a 24-hour bunk and an all-fruit can snackery. Jed saw a customs declaration office, permit registration building, smokestack repair shop, and a sign for Clean Bubbles deck scrubbing. They reached a platform, and Captain Bogg opened a metal control box. A dozen empty slots numbered 1 to 12 were marked with names of businesses. The captain plugged batteries into slots all the way to the 5th one, which read Copper Rose, and pressed a button. A waist-high gate slid into place, and the platform rose up the side of the spike. At the 5th floor, it halted, and the expended batteries hissed and dropped into a waste barrel below the panel. Before them stood an elaborate set of double doors. The wood was carved into intertwined roses, In the center of each door, the roses were coated in a film of copper. Ah, the copper rose, Captain Boggs said. Pavel opened his mouth. The copper rose? I've never stepped 1 foot in there. Well, Captain Boggs smiled, you're rich now, so step both feet in. He pushed open the doors. If an opera house could be a restaurant, this was it. When he was 10, Jed's father had taken him to the opera. Women appreciate a man with culture, he'd said. Now hide these bottles of root beer in your coat. They don't allow drinks at the opera. That's why I always pay extra for a curtained booth. I hope your mom remembered the roast beef sandwiches. Root beer's not the same without them, after all. Everything about the Copper Rose reminded Jed of that night. Scarlet curtains ruffled around private booths, their thick fabric bunched in the center with gold rope. Plush chairs with buttoned cushions, Roman columns, and just the right amount of amber-tinted light to make everything look like aged gold. For once, nothing felt like junk. Chair matched chair, table matched table. Waiters wore matching tuxedos with tails and white gloves. Jed pictured the tinker here, perhaps wearing a monocle and laughing the way rich people did over trivialities. It was a distinct sound, somewhere between a ha and a ho. Always in threes and often followed by a well said, chap, or preceded by an I say. A chandelier hung overhead. How had the crystal even survived a junk storm? Your best table, miss, Captain Boggs said to the hostess. She led them to a booth enclosed by a red curtain. What can I start you off with? She snapped cloth napkins in front of them in the air, then draped them across their laps. Pineapple juice, Captain Boggs said, studying the menu in front of him, and split pea soup. Jed nodded to himself. At least someone might appreciate the 11 different kinds of canned peas he had found. Either that or the captain was just trying to sound fancy. Do you have strawberries in syrup? Sprocket asked. Of course. Then 2 cans for me, she said with a smile. Riggs ordered maraschino cherries and applesauce. Shay ordered pickles and a can of Burston's cheddar easy cheese. Pavel ordered 3 cans of chicken, 2 cans of peaches, 1 can of chili, and a can of sugarcane syrup to drink. And for you? The waitress asked Jed. Just pineapple juice, thanks. Perhaps with a splash of guava nectar? Unstirred. Might I say that's an excellent choice? Jed smiled. You may, thank you. She left and returned a few minutes later with their order. She passed Pavel a porcelain gravy boat of sugarcane syrup, a thick crystal parfait dish filled with the peaches, and a fancy ashtray with the chili. Jed forced himself not to laugh, even when Pavel lifted the gravy boat, his pinky outstretched, and sipped syrup from the spout. Captain Bogg lifted his goblet of pineapple juice. Here's to Jed, they cheered. Here's to a new life of endless riches. Jed's smile disappeared. Endless? As long as that thing keeps running, Pavel said. Jed stared at the smiling faces. I appreciate all you've done for me. I really do. But I'm not here to look for treasure. My parents are missing, and I need to find them. They could be in trouble, or hurt, or... His voice stumbled. The crew looked at one another, smiles fading. Where do you plan to start? Captain Boggs set down his drink. I don't know. Then what's the harm in biding your time, scooping up bathtubs full of batteries? I'm not here to get rich. Jed slammed his drink on the table. Pineapple juice splashed around it. I'm sorry. He drew in an unsteady breath. I didn't mean to come out like that. But I can't just wait around hoping I'll bump into them. I need to search. Search how? Walk? The captain asked. If that's what it takes. Captain Bogg leaned back. Here's what I see. You need a boat, a crew that knows the terrain, and resources to travel. I happen to have 2 of the 3. But like any crew, we need gears for the engine, oils for the pistons, and food for the men. Just the men? Sprocket asked. Then what am I supposed to eat? Captain Bogg rolled his eyes. Deck planks. He turned back to Jed. We can help each other out. You're going to help me look for my parents? Like you helped me look for my grandfather? That didn't work out so well for me. Thanks, but no thanks. The captain leaned forward. Take us to one junk storm a week, and my ship's yours for the other 6 days. You point, Sprocket'll fly. How do I know you'll actually do that after a storm? You already found one. The next 6 days are yours. Jed paused. Wait, really? The captain nodded, a ship to himself. That was more than he could have hoped for on his own, by a mile. Deal. Captain Bog grinned, and his scars stretched over his face. And if you keep cooking, that makes you part of the crew, and crew gets equal share of the plunder. I'd cook whether I got a share or not. I have to eat that scrap too, you know. I'll drink to that. Pobble lifted the gravy boat and took a swig of syrup. Captain Bog chugged his pineapple juice, then clapped the glass down. Who are we looking for? Give me their names. Ryan and Mary. Ryan and Mary what? I can't say. They told me not to tell anyone my last name. What scrap advice is that? Riggs said, wiping cherry juice from his lips. How are we supposed to find them? So we don't know exactly who we're looking for, where they are, what happened to them, or who took them, Captain Bog asked. Did I miss anything? I know that's not much to go on, Jed said. What about friends, enemies, people who wanted to hurt them? Hurt them? Who would want to hurt them? No, no one. What about motive? Were they rich? Jed's parents never really talked about money. They didn't seem rich, but they weren't poor. Although week-long vacations every few months my whole life, normal people don't have the money to do that, right? But their house wasn't big or new. The cabinetry was outdated, the linoleum scuffed, and the carpets smelled faintly of whatever wet dog had lived there before them. No, I don't think they're rich. Riggs pointed at the watch. That's something to go on. Where did they get it? How many times do I have to tell you? I have no idea where it came from, okay? Riggs raised his hand as if Jed had pulled a knife. Just trying to help. More like fishing for clues. Captain Bog tipped the rim of his empty glass. I need more. Trying to find 2 people somewhere in the junkyard with nothing to go on is like... He thought for a moment. Scrap it all. That doesn't need a comparison. It's like trying to find 2 people somewhere in the junkyard with nothing to go on. If I knew anything else, I'd tell you. That's good to know. Then what are their last names? Jed glared. Captain Bog winked. Ryan and Mary, the captain repeated to himself. I suppose we could start in Yolande, and then... He paused. Shay, what are you doing? Shay was squirting lines of easy cheese in an oval over the tablecloth. Dot, 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 she said, speckling dots of cheese inside the shape. It's a lemon. Now I have yellow. Captain Bog's head swiveled back and forth. He shoved empty dishes over the cheese. Shay scowled. Well, I'm ready to go. He tossed several batteries on the table, then leaned in and whispered to Shay, I'd leave an extra big tip if I were you. All right, so I'm going to turn this over for a second. I have goop on my glasses and it's making it hard to read. So that easy squeeze cheese, I don't know if I've had this discussion while I was reading this book to you, but it's cheese in a can, kind of like whipped cream that comes in a can, but it's squeezed cheese. Super not fancy cheese, but really tasty cheese. I happen to love cheese. And when I was a little girl, every other summer we would drive to my grandparents' house. I lived in Denver at the time, and we would drive to Oklahoma, and it was a 1.5 day kind of drive. And my mom would always get that squeezed cheese and club crackers, and that was our snack in the car. So that was the snack. The cheese always reminds me of vacation food. Not fancy vacation food, just tasty vacation food. Chapter 21. The Roof Hotel was at the top of the tallest building in Dondrake, 40 floors up. The first 30 floors cost a battery apiece. The next 5 were 2 each. The final 5 took 5 batteries every stop. 65 batteries later, Jed had his own room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a bowl of complimentary cans, and a bathtub with battery-operated heating coils. The next morning, he strapped himself to one of the zipline coils. 40 flights below, the crew was already awake and waiting for him. Where to, Captain Golden Boy? Captain Bog asked as Jed landed. Before he could respond, the captain turned to the others. Oh, And that's not going to be a thing, by the way. If any of you slugs call him captain, I'll stuff you in an empty can and roll you down the stairs. I don't know, Jed said. Where do you think we should start? A man named Digger might be able to help. Digger it is, then. Captain Bog led Jed to a shop called the Etch Book. An elderly man, missing most of his teeth, waved them inside. Which of you handsome gentlemen wants an etching? I'll do one for 30 batteries, 2 for 50. It might sound high, but I do the best etch work in the yard. No one better than Digger the Etcher. No finer etch for 1,000 miles. That's a guarantee. Jed turned to Captain Bog. Etch work? We'll take 2. I hear good things about you, Digger. Word is you can etch just from description. Is that true, or am I only hearing scrap? It's true. Not many folks pay for such an etching. It's an easy etch. It's not an easy etch, after all. Captain Bog dropped a sack of batteries on the counter. Digger grinned, showing the few teeth he had left. Let's get started. He waved them to a room with an art easel and odd supplies. He picked up a spray gun connected to an air compressor with a hose, then waited. The captain nodded to Jed. Go ahead. With what? Tell him what your parents look like. Digger peeked over the easel. Oh, my dad has a big nose, but not my mom. Hers is small like mine. He glanced at Shay, like a mouse's. Digger meticulously released bursts of air at the easel as Jed spoke. Jed continued for hours. He described every feature in vivid detail. The freckles on his mom's cheek, which looked like a single shake of pepper. The bony cheekbones of his father. His mother's queen-like forehead. His father's eyes, wrinkled from 10,000 smiles. When he was finished, Digger turned the easel around and showed Jed 2 acid-etched metal plates. Jed's stomach clenched. His mom, his dad, they were smiling at him. How's this? Captain Bog elbowed Jed in the ribs. It's perfect. Jed took the plates. They were flawless. He reached into his pocket and handed Digger another handful of batteries. But your friend already... I know, Jed said, still staring at the pictures. This is just to say thank you. Can you make us stamps of these? Captain Bog asked. How many would you like? Digger asked. Let's start with 4 stacks. Digger took the etchwork to a black machine that looked something like a long barbecue grill. He placed the plates in a tray, then yanked a series of levers and pulleys. Steam coughed from small stacks. When Digger opened the reverse side, a copy of the etching dropped onto the floor with a metal clang. He continued until Jed had 4 stacks of 20 thin plates. For the rest of the evening, the crew helped Jed hang copies of the etchwork all around town, while Riggs and Shay stayed on board the tug and hovered near the dock. Each copy had instructions to contact them at dock line 487 if anyone recognized the picture. A day passed, and then a second, and 3 more. They talked to thousands of coppers and knocked on hundreds of spikes. Nothing. Kaiser suggested they try an iron township cluster. Farborough is half the size with twice as many people and 10 times the organization, he said. Yeah, and it's also iron regulated, Sprocket said. Kaiser folded his arms. And we don't exactly meet regulations. Regulations? Jed asked. Riggs cut in. I don't like it. The Iron Guard can check the ship anytime. They'll take one look and find T5 engine enhancers, carbon cord firearms, and dread paraphernalia, all of which will send us to an iron cell. I'm not getting my engine seized because some uptight customs officer thinks I shouldn't be allowed to own it. We'll just keep our distance, Captain Bog said. You'll drop us at a dock zone in the morning and pick us up at night. He turned to Jed. And while we're there, and nod politely to the scrap slugs, who don't give a clunk about anything or anyone but themselves. Those ramshackle, grease-chinned, pompous pieces of... He mumbled more incoherent curses to himself. Okay then, Jed said. Stay away from the clunk. Exactly. Kaiser scowled. It's called order, he said. It's better than letting a whole town full of lunatics swing through the air on chains. Captain Bog held up a hand. I shouldn't have said anything. Iron, copper, it doesn't matter. They're all scrap. It was a full day's travel to Farborough. When they were 4 scopes away, a pinprick of light glimmered on the horizon. The closer they got, the brighter it became. The townships shone like a mirror under the sun. Polished steel plated every surface, as if the whole metropolis had been outfitted in a suit of battle armor. Riggs dropped the rest of them at the nearest dock zone, and they walked into the township. Farborough was the opposite of Dondrake in every way. The Farborough spikes looked like long, sleek silver needles. The streets were perfectly bricked in aluminum, and on those streets, people walked with purpose. No one meandered about like the coppers had. An unsettling silence blanketed the township. Jed felt uncomfortable even whispering while they walked. As they had before, they all took the etchwork from shop to shop, asking if anyone recognized the people in the image. No one did. Until they entered Hamlin's brewery. Jed called for attention as he moved from group to group, flashing the etchings to anyone who would look. Again, nobody recognized the images. Jed turned to leave, shoulders down. "Wait," a voice called. "Let me see those again." A man with gray hair and a well-groomed beard held out his hand. Jed showed him the pictures. The man nodded to himself. "How do you know these two?" "They're my parents," Jed said. He nodded. "And what names did you say?" "Ryan and Mary." "Ryan and Mary who?" "Just Ryan and Mary." "Just Ryan and Mary," he stroked his chin. "They wouldn't happen to have the last name Jenkins, would they?" Sprocket's gaze shot toward Jed. "Jenkins? Ryan and Mary Jenkins?" Jed's skin felt hot. His cheeks burned. The man's eyes shifted in a strange way. His hand moved to a holster on his hip, and he pulled a shatterbox free. But before he could lift it, Sprocket's 4-foot shatterlance was somehow already in her hands, at the ready. "Do you know what that kid is worth?" the man said to Sprocket. "We'll split it 50-50. "I don't think you know who you're talking to," Sprocket said. "I'm not some iron gutter clunk. I'm a javelin." "Javelin?" he nearly shouted the word. "A javelin in this establishment?" The room felt deathly silent as every person's eyes fell on Sprocket. Kaiser leaned toward her. "We should probably run," he whispered. Sprocket eyed the room of glaring faces. "We should probably run," she repeated to Jed. A few irons rose from their seats. Shatterboxes hissed and hummed as others around them readied their equipment. Still holding the shatterlance in one arm, Sprocket unclipped a canister from her belt with her free hand. The canister dropped to the floor, and a cloud of smoke burst around them, filling the room. Chairs slid away from tables, and iron footsteps thundered around them. "Now," Sprocket said, "go!" Iron everywhere began to shout, and more shatterboxes hissed to life. Blue bolts pierced the cloud of smoke and sailed over Jed's head. "Run!" Kaiser yelled, yanking Jed by the arm, leading him to the exit. Kaiser shoved open a set of double doors, and smoke spilled into an empty street. "Follow me," he called to the others, still holding tight to Jed's arm. They ran, but every iron from the brewery chased. The iron shouted to others in the streets to stop them. By the time they reached their docks, at least 100 iron were on their tail. "Get us up and out of here!" Captain Boggs shouted to Riggs and Shea on board. Ladders uncoiled down the ship. "If ever there was a time to learn ladder climbing," Captain Boggs said to Jed, "now it is. Now is it. Jump." They each leaped from the dock onto a rope ladder. Bessie's propellers whirred, and the tug lifted away from Farborough. "Jenkins?" Sprocket said when they were clear from the township. "Ryan and Mary Jenkins?" Jed nodded. "You know them?" "Everyone does. They're the ones who started this whole war." "They what?" "Most everyone in the yard used to think gilded relics were just glitter tails," Sprocket said. "Did you know that?" "Well, turns out most of the yard was wrong, because the Jenkinses found one. The only gilded relic that's ever been found." "My mom and dad?" She nodded. "Those two were cracked as gutter clunk." "What do you mean? What does that mean?" "I mean they were insane, like their heads were full of applesauce instead of practicality." "Practicality?" Kaiser said, one eyebrow raised. "This coming from you?" "Hey," Sprocket said, "I'm as batty as the next copper, but the Jenkinses were as madcap as coppers ever get." My parents were copper? Jed asked. Javelins, Sprocket said with a nod. The best. And one day they just flew straight into the fog. Everyone thought they were dead, but 6 months later, out they come with a gilded relic and a whole armada of dread nipping at their tails. Sprocket laughed once. I swear, every copper, iron, rust, and dread chased those two over every inch of the yard. Then one day, they just disappeared. But what if they didn't just up and disappear? Captain Boggs said. He turned to Jed. What if they dug their way under the fringe? The others followed his gaze. Then they looked back to Sprocket. My sister hunted for the Jenkinses, she said. I used to help her mark up yard maps back home. We'd shade out areas whenever someone claimed to have had a Jenkins sighting. The last few areas weren't too far away from the spot where we picked up Golden Boy. Kaiser looked at Jed's watch. So then that Junkstorm spotter really is the stolen gilded relic? Shay giggled and covered her mouth with both hands. Sorry, she said. What's so funny, Kaiser asked. I've already told you, Shay said. It's pretty, yes, but it's not gilded pretty. It's only regular pretty. That would be too silly, much too silly. While the crew argued Shay's point, Jed thought about his parents. Copper javelins. Javelins who started a war. I know where we can go, Sprocket said. You do? Jed asked. There's a secret javelin base about 900 scopes west. 900? Kaiser said. That doesn't make sense. I've never heard of copper operatives out that far west. Did you not hear the part about it being a secret? You think they'll know where my parents are? She shrugged. Maybe. If any copper would, they would. 900 scopes is a decent flight for a guess. A month, maybe more, Captain Boggs said. It's all I got, Sprocket said. Captain Boggs looked at Jed and nodded. All right, then let's hit a storm on the way out, fuel up and head west. It'll be a long trip. Jed smiled. Thank you. Maybe you are thoughtfulness and warm hugs after all. And maybe that's just your imagination talking. All right, so news update. So we've learned that Captain Butterfly, Jed's grandfather, supposedly put Shay in a cage and beat her with pipes. And now his parents are accused of starting this whole war between all the different metals over a gilded relic, which I'm still not sure I understand, but I can't wait to find out what all of this means. So stay tuned, guys. A couple more chapters in a little while. Not today, my eyes are tired, but in a few days. Keep watching, keep listening, stay safe, have fun, happy summer. See you again soon.